Everything collapsed with a single sound, a cold metallic ding that echoed through the airport speakers. And in that instant, every flight board at Denver International Airport flashed red like an approaching apocalypse. Delayed. 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 More than 100 flights, more than 10,000 passengers, the entire Northern Skies Airlines network, from New York to Seattle, from Chicago to Dallas, all grounded at once. And in the middle of that chaos stood one man who didn't move. Ethan Marshall. 45 years old, tall, broad, shouldered a face carved like granite, with eyes so calm that people around him felt as though they were watching a storm, while the eye of that storm stood fixed and unshaken. In his hand, his phone screen was still lit. The trembling voice of Richard Hale, the chairman of Northern Skies Airlines, spilled through the speaker, cracking under panic as he begged Ethan, "Please, please lift this order, we can talk. Calm down, do not escalate this." Ethan responded, without raising his voice, without anger. Just one short sentence, sharp as a blade. "You should have thought about that before you called me boy." The chaos erupted, like a door blowing off its hinges. Passengers shouted, frantic travelers ran from counter to counter. Pilots removed their caps and loosened their ties, sweating because they had no idea what was happening. Airport staff tried to reassure people, but their own eyes were filled with fear. Only Ethan stood still. No one knew who he was. No one knew that the man who had been insulted and humiliated just 50 minutes earlier was the very spark that brought a multi-billion-dollar system crashing to its knees in seconds. No one except Ethan. And before everything descended into chaos, the story had begun on a perfectly peaceful morning. 5:30 in the morning. The first rays of Denver sunlight spilled through the floor to ceiling windows of his penthouse. They swept across the marble table, brushed over the faint layer of dust on a framed family photo, then cast a golden sheen across Ethan's powerful physique as he pushed himself upright. Ethan Marshall did not use alarms. He never needed them. His body was trained like steel, disciplined with a rhythm more precise than a military clock. When his feet touched the cool wooden floor, the slight chill sharpened his senses. He stood, loosened his neck, rolled his shoulders, familiar movements repeated every morning for years. No voice spoke, except the one in his mind. Today has to be perfect. Because today was not ordinary. Today was the day that would determine whether Sentinel Cyber Systems, the company he had built over more than 2 decades, would rise into its golden era or miss the greatest expansion opportunity in its history. The meeting with Hawthorne Capital at 2 in the afternoon in Phoenix, a deal worth $500 million. $500 million to expand next-generation security, AI $500 million to elevate Sentinel into the ranks of America's most powerful tech conglomerates. Ethan opened the faucet and splashed cold water onto his face. It ran down his jawline, tracing the sharp edges of his bone structure. In the mirror, the reflection staring back at him carried more than determination. There was something deeper, something no one else ever saw. A long-standing exhaustion, a constant vigilance, a lifetime of preparation for every look, every word, every silent doubt he had been forced to face in a world where people who looked like him were always treated as if they were in the wrong place. He began his workout, 40 push-ups, 30 burpees, 10 minutes of high-speed running, not to show off, but to clear the weight on his mind before the mental battle he knew he would face today. At 8:40, he put on a crisp white shirt and tightened a charcoal Tom Ford tie. The way he stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar, pulling the knot snug, looked exactly like a soldier preparing for a battlefield without bullets or bombs, but one filled with prejudice barriers and the silent judgment Ethan had known all his life. He glanced at his phone. A message from Olivia Brooks, the most reliable assistant he had ever had. Updated schedule, Northern Skies. Flight at 10:45, arrival in Phoenix at 12:20, plenty of time. Hawthorne Capital requests your presence in person. Ethan replied with a single thumbs-up icon. Olivia understood him. He was not one to waste words. She also understood something else. Ethan always gave himself extra time, not because he feared delays, but because he had grown far too used to being treated differently in places where everyone should have been treated the same. With a faint smile, he stepped out the door. 9:15 in the morning, when Ethan's Tesla rolled into the drop-off lane at Denver International Airport, the morning sun struck the glass facade of the terminal and lit up the entire area. A valet approached, instantly recognizing him. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall, traveling for business?" Ethan tightened his grip on the handle of his sleek black leather bag and nodded. "Phoenix." "Have a safe trip, sir. I will take care of your car." Ethan did not like people bowing or fussing, but genuine respect from hard-working staff always warmed him more than applause at glamorous corporate events. He walked inside. The airport was a river of movement, rolling suitcases, loudspeakers echoing announcements, hurried footsteps, families laughing, business travelers arguing on their phones, a tired child crying. A swirl of colors and sounds shaped the daily pulse of a place where hundreds of thousands passed through. Ethan walked with steady posture, eyes set on the Northern Skies Airline's first-class counter. But then the glances came, quick, passing, subtle. A white woman around 60 pursed her lips as he walked by. A man clutched his backpack tighter. A TSA agent watched him longer than necessary. The feeling was not new. It was like a scar that never quite healed. He told himself, "Let it go. The meeting today matters more." He reached the counter. One person was ahead of him, a white, middle-aged man in a navy suit laughing with the agent as if they were friends. Ethan waited, hand resting on his suitcase handle. Then he heard it. "Next, please." He stepped up. The check-in agent, a man around 30 with a sharp haircut name tag reading Scott Turner, did not look up. Name: Ethan Marshall, First Class, Phoenix, 10:45. Scott tapped a few keys, then said flatly, "ID." Ethan handed over his ID and the email showing Seat 2A. Scott stared at his screen for several seconds. His expression shifted, not toward politeness, but something colder. There is an issue with your ticket." Ethan blinked. He had heard this line far too many times. "What issue?" "The system shows you in economy. My email clearly shows Seat 2A First Class." Scott did not bother glancing at the phone Ethan held out. "The computer is the accurate source." "You were downgraded." Ethan kept his voice calm. "I have flown first class for 7 years straight. There is no reason for a downgrade unless requested." Scott shrugged, printed a boarding pass and shoved it toward him. "You can fly economy or rebook. I am busy." Ethan lifted his gaze to the screen behind Scott. "First class, 3 seats available." He raised his chin slightly and pointed. "There are 3 open seats," Scott replied without expression. "The board is not updated." At that moment, a white man in an Oxford shirt stepped up beside him and asked, "Excuse me, any first-class seats available?" Scott immediately lit up. "Yes, sir. Let me upgrade you. I have excellent seats." In less than half a minute, the man walked away, holding a first-class boarding pass. Ethan remained still. No anger, No shouting. Only one thought slipped quietly into his mind. Again. If this had been the first time, he would have let it go. If it had truly been a system glitch, he would not have said a word. But this was a pattern, a lifetime of repetition. They looked at him, judged him, assumed he was out of place. But today they had chosen the wrong man. He said slowly, "I would like to speak to a supervisor." Someone behind him nodded in sympathy. An older woman gave Scott a disapproving glare. They did not speak, but they saw. Scott snapped, "If you insist on making this a big deal, step aside." Ethan stepped aside and pulled out his phone. "Olivia had messaged you through security yet?" He replied, "Almost small issue." A small issue, he thought. But in reality, it was the spark that would reduce Northern Skies Airlines to ruins within the hour. 15 minutes later, the supervisor arrived. Melissa Grant, 35, blonde hair, navy blazer, a well-trained corporate smile, but eyes that carried a quiet certainty that she was always right. Ethan explained, showed his proof, pointed out the discrepancy. Melissa typed a few times, then repeated Scott's line, almost word for word. "The system shows economy. First class is full. The board shows seats. The board is wrong. I booked through the Airline's app. You may have misunderstood." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Misunderstood. The man who designed security systems for dozens of major corporations misunderstood a simple booking app. He looked directly into her eyes. "I did not misunderstand anything." But before Melissa could answer, a white woman approached claiming she had a similar issue. Melissa instantly softened. "Oh, let me fix that for you." Within 2 minutes, she handed that woman a first-class pass. Ethan stood silent. More passengers noticed some shaking their heads. Something inside him, a long, accumulated exhaustion, pricked sharply like a needle. He set his bag down gently and said, "Call the gate manager." His voice was soft. But Melissa suddenly became defensive. "Nothing will change. I want the manager." Her reply came out like a razor. "Fine, but I am telling you now it will not change anything." She walked away. Ethan exhaled slowly, not from fear, not from weariness, but because he knew they had pushed him to a point he no longer wished to tolerate. He looked up at the high ceiling where sunlight filtered through the skylights in long golden streaks and thought, not today, not this time. An elderly black woman sitting nearby met his eyes and nodded gently. She did not speak, but her gaze said everything. "I understand. I have lived it too." Ethan tightened his grip on his bag. No one knew who he was. No one knew the power he held. No one knew that the very system they relied on had been built by the man they were dismissing. A gate manager was about to walk out. And that would be the final drop. The moment everything changed. The moment Northern Skies Airlines made the biggest mistake in its history. And the moment Ethan Marshall decided to bring down an entire empire with one phone call. The gate manager finally appeared. Brian Holden, 41 years old, walked in with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the entire terminal. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie, crook at his face, flushed either from rushing or from an inflated sense of authority. But the most striking thing about him was his eyes, a look Ethan had seen thousands of times in his life. The look of someone who believed he had the right to judge others. The look of someone convinced Ethan did not belong here. Brian didn't look at Ethan first. He looked at Melissa, then at the computer, then at the growing line of irritated passengers. He let out a long exhale the kind of sigh people use when they think they are being forced to deal with something beneath them. "What is the problem?" he asked, though the question was directed at Melissa. Ethan answered before she could speak. "I booked a first-class seat 3 weeks ago, confirmed seat 2A, but your staff told me I was downgraded." Brian rolled his eyes, as if Ethan had just described a minor drizzle, and he asked, already impatient. And Ethan replied slowly, "There are 3 first-class seats still open. I have the confirmation email. I watched someone else get upgraded right in front of me while I was denied." Brian did not bother to look at the email. He did not look at the board. He simply said, "The system shows economy, so it is economy. Computers do not make mistakes." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Your computers were built by my company." For the first time in the entire exchange, Brian looked up at Ethan, not with respect, but with scrutiny doubt and a hint of mockery. "Where do you work?" he asked. "Sentinel Cyber Systems." Brian smirked. "Never heard of it." Melissa stiffened slightly. A man in line muttered in disbelief at the ignorance. Ethan did not bother to explain. They would understand soon enough. "As I said to your staff," he continued, "I am not budging. I need to be in Phoenix on time." Brian crossed his arms and leaned back, looking like a petty gatekeeper pretending to command real power. "You have 2 choices," he said. "Fly economy or fly another airline." "I want a third option," Ethan replied, which is Brian lifted an eyebrow, "that you do your job correctly." A few passengers chuckled. Some nodded in support. The tiny reaction only irritated Brian further. His fragile pride cracked, and he snapped. "Listen," he growled. "Do not try to intimidate us with whatever company you claim to run. I have worked here for 16 years. I know how the system works." Ethan studied him quietly. He had met this type all his life, people who were dangerous not because they held great power, but because they held small power, and used it to crush people they believed were beneath them. Ethan said softly, "I want the name of your employee, and I want your name." Brian barked out a laugh filled with contempt. "What is this, you planning to sue us?" Ethan held his gaze. "I want the proper procedure," followed. Melissa cut in, her confidence wavering. "Sir, we truly cannot." Ethan had not even answered when Brian shoved Melissa aside, planted both hands on the counter, and leaned into Ethan's face. Then he said it, the word that dragged centuries of pain back into the present. "Boy, stop holding up my line." Time froze. The noise of the airport faded. The speaker announcements, the rolling suitcases, the chatter of passengers, everything dimmed. Only that word remained. Boy. It fell like a stone, weighing 1,000 pounds in Ethan's chest. Not because he was surprised, not because he had never heard it, but because he knew that in that instant, every restraint within him no longer needed to exist. An older black couple standing nearby gasped. The wife clutched her chest. The husband stared at Brian with a quiet, razor-sharp fury. A group of white college students exchanged stunned, uncomfortable looks. An Asian woman pulled out her phone and began recording. A Hispanic passenger muttered, "Dude, seriously." Ethan did not flinch. He did not react. He did not change expression. It felt as if he had trained his entire life for this moment. He picked up his bag, placed the strap over his shoulder, and said, "You should think very carefully before calling anyone boy." Brian shot back instantly. "I want you away from this counter right now." Too late. Everything had slipped out of Brian's control long before he understood what was happening. Ethan tilted his head, not looking at Brian anymore, but toward the tall glass windows where the Denver sunlight spilled into the concourse. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He took out his phone, swiped the screen, opened his favorites list. His finger stopped on a single name. Ava Carter, Chief Technology Officer, Sentinel Cyber Systems. He pressed call. Brian scoffed. "Oh, calling your lawyer. Go ahead and sue, but right now you are leaving my counter." Ethan lifted the phone to his ear. When Ava picked up his voice, lost every trace of being the one offended. It became cold, steady, and terrifying enough that people near him felt a chill. "Ava, implement Protocol 27. Ava responded instantly, without a single question. "Full execution, full." "Understood." Ethan hung up. Brian laughed again. "You think tossing around useless tech terms scares me? Please." But his voice was cut off by the airport speakers. A soft chime echoed. "Bing bong. Attention all Northern Skies passengers." The announcement stretched through the air, not loud, but powerful enough to silence the surrounding noise. Ethan did not turn. He did not need to. He simply counted in his head. 3, 2, 1. Then the massive departure board above them flickered and shifted. Every Northern Skies flight number from 110 through 982 switched to the same red word: delayed. The uproar erupted instantly. People cursed. People panicked. People grabbed phones to call family. Some ran to the counters demanding answers. Melissa stood frozen. Brian's eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the board. Scott nearly dropped an entire box of boarding passes. And in the middle of the rising storm, Ethan stood still. He said nothing. He did nothing. A faint smile touched the corner of his lips. Not triumph, not revenge, but the smile of someone who understood that sometimes respect requires a blow strong enough to wake people up. Brian stumbled forward, voice trembling. What is happening? What did you do?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He kept looking toward the tarmac, where a Northern Skies Boeing 787 sat motionless, like a steel beast bound in chains. Then he turned back, his eyes calm. That he said softly is called consequence. You dare." Brian stammered, sweat rolling down his temple. Ethan replied gently, "I gave you chances. Many chances. You chose the wrong road." A young airport employee rushed over, pale-faced. "Mr. Holden, all check in. Systems, check-out systems, boarding systems, reservation systems. Everything just shut down." "Impossible," Brian shouted. "Impossible. This system is controlled only by Sentinel." He froze, his face drained of color. His eyes slowly lifted to meet Ethan's. Ethan tilted his head. "Earlier you asked where I worked. Now is a good time to learn," Brian whispered. "Sentinel Cyber Systems is the primary technology contractor for Northern Skies." "Correct. And Protocol 27 is an emergency shutdown order triggered when severe violations are detected, such as, for example, discrimination against a customer." Brian's face twisted not with anger, but with the realization that he had called the wrong man boy. And now the man he had dismissed with a single glance was standing in the center of a storm he had unleashed himself. Not a troublemaker, not a difficult passenger, not a man of color trying to act superior, but the largest shareholder of Northern Skies' parent company. The architect and controller of the airline's entire IT infrastructure. A man with enough authority to freeze a multi-billion-dollar corporation with one command. Brian stepped back. Melissa covered her mouth in horror. Scott stood rooted to the floor, still staring at the glowing red flight board. All three understood one thing with absolute clarity. They had crossed the wrong person, and the price would be steep. Ethan looked at them for a long moment. No hatred, no vengeance, only the calm gaze of someone who had finally grown tired enough to say, "Enough." And this was only the beginning. Shouts, phone calls, fists pounding on counters, all of it blended into a wall of chaotic noise that swallowed the entire area around Gate Bravo, 17, at Denver International Airport. Yet at the center of the storm, Ethan remained unmoving, as steady as a monument anchored into the ground. His calm presence only drew more eyes toward him, because the quieter he stood, the more obvious it became who the true center of this hurricane was. Ethan Marshall, the man who had just been called boy, the man who had brought an entire airline to its knees. But no one yet knew the full story. No one understood the magnitude of the power sitting quietly in the hands of this man. No one except the ones who had begun to panic as the truth revealed itself. Brian Holden stood only an arm's length away, but like someone overwhelmed by the glare of a spotlight, he could no longer maintain the confident posture he had moments earlier. His eyes darted around like a cornered animal. Another transmission crackled through his radio, making him flinch. "Brian, every gate system in Terminal Charlie is frozen. We cannot process a single flight." A second voice burst in, even more frantic. "Not just Terminal Charlie. Terminals Alpha and Delta are affected too. We cannot access the customer database." Brian froze. Ethan looked at him not with triumph or vengeance, but with a calm, devastating truthfulness. A staff member rushed over, face pale. "Mr. Holden, President Hale is looking for you. Urgent. Extremely urgent." Brian swallowed hard, the sound so loud that people nearby heard it. He knows I am here." "Yes, and he is very angry. For the grounding. For everything." The staff member glanced at Ethan and gave a small, respectful nod, a gesture so instinctive it came from a place deeper than protocol, even though they had never met before. A small group of passengers approached Ethan. A white man around 50, in an expensive suit, face filled with remorse, said, "I saw everything. The way they treated you. It was not right." A young blonde woman, her voice trembling, added, "I recorded part of it. If you need it, I will testify." An Asian American woman whispered, "They did not treat me that way, but I saw the difference in how they spoke to you. I am sorry. Truly sorry you had to go through that." Ethan nodded. Their kindness warmed him, but he also knew something deeper, a truth carved from years of experience. Personal goodwill does not erase the behavior of a system built on habit. He replied quietly, "Thank you. I appreciate it. But keep your phones. You will not need to provide evidence. Not for long." His words made them all pause. It was not a threat, not a promise. It was simply something that was about to happen. Melissa, the supervisor, stood nearby, face ashen like cold ash. She seemed to have just received a call she clearly wished she never had to answer. "Oh my God," she whispered, hand covering her mouth. Ethan glanced at her, and though there was no hatred in his eyes, there was something else. Disappointment. "Your name?" he asked. Melissa Grant." "Melissa," he said slowly, "what you have been doing, not just today, but on so many days, before this is the kind of thing that creates the deep wounds inside people like me." Melissa stammered, I was just following procedure." Ethan tilted his head. "What procedure tells you to treat me differently from that other woman?" Melissa said nothing. She could not. Ethan did not press. He did not need to. because the punishment was no longer coming from him. It was coming from the truth, and the truth had begun to shine. The check-in counter to the left erupted. Flight 562 delayed. Flight 420 delayed. Flight 801 delayed. A group of passengers from Gate 21 came rushing in, shouting, "What is going on with this airline? I am late for a wedding. I am late for a surgery. I am late for my mother's funeral." Ethan looked at the chaos. His expression carried no satisfaction. There was no victory when thousands of people suffered. But he knew something essential. Large systems only change when their pain points are hit directly. Today he had been insulted. His dignity had been trampled. But the larger issue was a system that had become accustomed to treating people like him as if they were lesser. And after 45 years of living through it, Ethan decided they would change even if the cost was grounding an entire airline. Suddenly Brian rushed at him, voice cracking into a near scream. "You, come to the office now. President Hale wants to talk to you directly." Ethan still did not move. "Good. No, I mean he wants to talk to you right now. On the phone, right this second." Ethan set his bag on a chair. Then he sat. A simple movement, calm, controlled. But it sent Brian into a frenzy. "What are you doing?" Ethan folded his arms. "I am waiting for his call." Peb, peb, peb. Melissa's phone chimed. She handed it to Brian with shaking hands. It is President Hale." Brian trembled so hard he nearly dropped the phone. He turned to Ethan like a man begging for instructions. "I should," Ethan said softly. "Give it to me." That simple sentence shattered the last of Brian's pride. Ethan was not asking. He was commanding. And Brian, who had shouted at him earlier, who had called him boy, handed over the phone with both hands, as if afraid a delay of even 1 second might cost him his job. Ethan took the phone and put it on speaker. Richard Hale's voice erupted, tightly controlled, but edging with fury. "Hold and tell me why the entire Northern Skies system is locked, why we are losing more than $300,000 every minute." Brian opened his mouth to answer, but Ethan spoke first. "Richard." "It is me." Silence filled the line so heavy that Melissa flinched. Ethan continued, "I am the one who activated Protocol 27. The silence deepened until the air seemed ready to snap. Then Richard's voice cracked. "Ethan. Ethan Marshall, CEO of Sentinel. Is that you?" "Yes, my God." "How why did you?" "Your employees." Ethan said, his voice, low but ringing like a hammer, called me boy. The crowd around them seemed to fall into a collective hush. Before that, Ethan continued, "They denied my first-class ticket with a series of excuses, even though there were seats available, and even though they upgraded someone else right in front of me." Richard inhaled sharply, as if assembling the full picture in his mind. "Ethan, I am truly sorry. We will handle this. Please disable Protocol 27. You are shutting down our entire operation." Ethan looked directly at Brian. Brian immediately bowed his head, sweat dripping from his forehead. "I will disable it," Ethan said. "But first you need to understand the severity of what just happened." Richard's tone shifted to one of full seriousness. "I am listening." Ethan spoke slowly, articulating every word. "Your system was down for only 15 minutes. But in those 15 minutes, you learned enough to understand that discrimination is not only morally wrong, it is extremely expensive," a passenger whispered behind him. "That was perfect." Another nodded. Yes, someone needed to say it. Brian stood motionless, like a wooden post hammered into the ground. Melissa was on the verge of tears, Scott had sunk into a chair, holding his head. Richard breathed heavily through the speaker. "Ethan, tell me your conditions." Ethan looked at them, the people who had dismissed him, not even half an hour earlier. He did not answer immediately. He let the weight of the moment settle. Then he said, "I want change, and I will give you the full list when we speak in person." Before Richard could say anything else, Ethan ended the call. He placed the phone on the table and looked at Brian. One look heavy as a judgment. "You asked me earlier where I work," Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but everyone within 30 feet heard it clearly. "Now you know." Then he stood and walked toward the seating area, unhurried, steady, composed, like a man who had orchestrated the entire storm. Like someone who did not need to raise his voice to make the world listen. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, who is that man?" The mother answered softly with reverence, "Someone no one should ever underestimate." And that was still only the beginning. Ethan sat down in a chair near the window, placing his bag by his foot. The Denver morning sunlight stretched across the airport floor in long, glittering streaks like shattered glass. But in his mind, there was no light at all. Only the cold stillness of a man who had just triggered an earthquake. He was not shaken, not regretful, not excited, just tired. Not tired from what he had done, but tired from enduring things no one should ever have to endure for far too long. Beside him, a black man in his 50s sat down and leaned toward him slightly. "Brother," the man said softly, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for standing up. I have lived 50 years and faced this 100 times, but I have never seen someone make an entire system kneel like that." Ethan offered a faint smile, not boastful, simply honest. It was time they listened. The man nodded, gratitude glowing in his eyes. "Yes, and you did what I have wished someone would do for a long time." Meanwhile, at the check-in counter, Brian Holden seemed barely able to stand. His illusion of authority had just been shattered, not by shouting, not by rage, but by the reality that he had used a word no one has the right to use, and he had said it to the wrong man. Melissa held her phone to her chest, whispering over and over, "My God, I did not expect." Every few seconds, she glanced at Ethan as if afraid he might walk back and strike judgment on her. But Ethan no longer looked at them. That no longer mattered, because when an entire system is broken, punishing a few people is only the smallest part. What Ethan wanted was to change the foundation itself. Quick footsteps echoed through the terminal. A young airport employee, practically running, handed Brian a black office phone. You need to hear this." Brian's voice shook. From who? The chief operations officer of Northern Skies. Brian nearly choked. The COO. The second highest ranking leader in the entire company. The employee handed him the phone, with hands trembling like leaves. Brian pressed it to his ear. But only 5 seconds later, he yanked it away, as if it had burned him. "Here, what did he just ask me?" The employee stood frozen, terrified. Brian gasped for air, face drained of all color. "He asked me why I called the CEO of Sentinel Cyber Systems boy." Melissa's phone slipped from her hand so hard she almost dropped it. Scott, standing farther back, was shaking violently. He whispered to himself, desperate to cling to disbelief. No. There is no way no CEO would dress this casually, no way. A passenger behind him replied sharply, "That is your problem. You only think CEOs are white men in suits." Scott fell silent, but the truth of that sentence hit harder than any insult. Ethan sat with his laptop open, reviewing the slides for his meeting with Hawthorne Capital. His fingers moved across the keyboard smoothly, as though the chaos around him had nothing to do with him. But the truth was, every scream, every delayed announcement, every cry from someone missing a life-changing moment pierced him. Ethan was not heartless. He did not enjoy seeing people suffer. He was simply done. For decades, he had chosen silence, chosen to move on, chosen to smile through it, chosen to believe things would improve if he did not cause trouble. But today they went too far. Not because of the downgrade, not because of the check-in debacle, but because of one word. Boy. A word created to demean. A word used to remind someone that they are beneath you. A word his father, a former military man, had heard too many times when he was young. Ethan remembered his father's words. "Son, you are strongest when you are calm. Let them see that your stillness is more frightening than your anger." Today he honored those words. 10 minutes passed. Then a woman's voice called out, clear and urgent. "Mr. Marshall." Ethan looked up. A young woman in a Northern Skies uniform hurried toward him. She was around 28, dark-haired, visibly shaken. "I am sorry to interrupt. I am from the operations office upstairs." She drew a deep breath. "President Hale wants to speak with you, directly, through video call." Ethan nodded. "Take me somewhere quiet." "Yes, sir." She led him through the crowd. People watched him with curiosity, respect, even admiration. Silence spread with every step he took, like a wave following him. Inside a small airport office, President Hale was already waiting on the screen. He was 58, with elegant silver hair, a flawless black suit, and the kind of calm face he always wore on CNBC. But this morning, tension carved deep lines across it. "Ethan," he said, "as soon as the screen lit up, I will be direct. What happened in Denver this morning is unacceptable. I have heard the recordings. I have seen the videos." "And He paused, locking eyes with Ethan. "I am deeply ashamed." Ethan did not reply. He did not need to. Hale drew in a long breath. "My employees insulted you. Completely wrong. Beyond anything imaginable. I take responsibility. And I will fix this." His corporate polish slipped away. What remained was a man who understood that real leadership is not about power, but about principles. Hale continued, "I am not here to excuse anything. Not here to avoid blame. I am here to ask for one chance to repair the damage." Ethan leaned back slightly. "I am listening." Hale nodded. "I want to meet you in person. As soon as you land in Phoenix, we will discuss the conditions for ending Protocol 27 as well as a full reform plan." Ethan checked his watch. "Then I need to arrive in Phoenix on time." "You will," Hale said firmly. "I will make sure of it." But first, he looked down, then up past Ethan, at Brian, who stood outside the office glass face, as white as paper. "Brian Holden, effective immediately. You are terminated." Melissa let out a small scream. Scott collapsed into a chair. Brian stood, frozen eyes, wide mouth open, but no sound coming out. And Hale was not finished. Melissa Grant the same, and Scott Turner. A cold draft swept through the room. Three people who had treated Ethan like a nuisance, now stared at the floor, trembling, stripped of the authority they once abused. This was not revenge, not satisfaction. This was justice. Ethan simply said, "Thank you for taking action." But this is not over. Hale nodded, recognizing he was speaking to someone equal, someone who could not be silenced by money or position. "I know. And I am ready." Ethan stood. "Then prepare yourself. We have a lot to discuss." He left the room. When Ethan returned to the waiting area, the entire concourse was silent. No one spoke. No one judged. No one doubted. They looked at him with a different kind of gaze, a new one, a respectful one. A 12-year-old white boy walked up to him and whispered, I think you are really cool. I want to be like you when I grow up." Ethan crouched slightly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You do not need to be like me," he said. "You just need to be someone who knows what is right and is brave enough to say it." The boy nodded, hard eyes shining. Ethan returned to his seat. For the first time in 2 hours, he felt a hint of peace. He opened his phone. A message from Olivia appeared. Hawthorne Capital heard about what happened. They want to move the meeting to 4 p.m. and they said they are very impressed. Ethan smiled, weary but genuine, the smile of a man who had just fought a battle not only for himself, but for countless others. He looked out at the airport. Northern Skies aircraft still sat motionless, but not for long. Change had begun. No one knew, except Ethan, that today would become a defining moment in the history of American aviation. No one knew the tidal wave from Denver would soon roll into boardrooms, offices, and flights across the country. And no one knew this was only the first wave. Denver Airport now felt like the chest of a giant struggling to breathe. Every blinking information board, every alert tone, every whisper from the crowd created an uneven, hurried, heavy heartbeat across the terminal. And in the middle of all that chaos, Ethan remained seated. People looked at him like they were staring at a paradox, a calm man at the center of a collapsing aviation empire. No one knew how many thoughts were running through his mind, how many calculations, how many layers of exhaustion and resolve were woven together inside him. But one person looked at him differently, not with curiosity, not with suspicion, but with respect. She was a white woman around 35, brown hair, tied neatly back, pale blue eyes, like a lake after a storm. She stepped forward, stopping a few feet from Ethan, both hands tightening slightly around her bag strap. "Excuse me, Mr. Marshall," she said quietly, but with a steady voice. Ethan looked up. "Yes." "My name is Rachel Linden. I am a ground operations coordinator with Northern Skies. I witnessed everything." She swallowed slowly. "And I want to apologize for what you went through." Ethan studied her not sharply, but deeply. "You do not need to apologize for an entire system," he said gently. "You did not create it." But Rachel shook her head. "No, I stood there. I saw it. I heard everything. And I did not say a word." Her voice cracked slightly. "I am not proud of that. I should have done something." Ethan remained silent. People usually apologize to ease their own guilt. True apologies come out slowly, trembling exactly like Rachel's. She continued, "What Mr. Holden and the others did is not unusual in this industry. It happens all the time, but hardly anyone ever has the power to hold them accountable." She tightened her bag strap. "But you did," Ethan breathed out softly, a breath filled with both weariness and the determination that would not allow him to break. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. Rachel gave a small, fragile smile and walked away. Ethan did not know it yet, but that would not be the last time their paths crossed. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the illusion of authority. Brian Holden was walking toward him, and for the first time in this long morning, his walk did not resemble a gatekeeper guarding power, but a man walking toward his own sentence. Every eye latched onto him like magnets, waiting to see what he would do. A man still recording zoomed in on Brian's face. Brian stopped in front of Ethan. Mr. Marshall, he began, but his voice cracked, trapped somewhere in his throat. I want to say, Ethan did not respond, his gaze still fixed on the tarmac. Brian, inhaled sharply. I am sorry. I am truly sorry. The crowd around them fell completely silent. Brian Holden, the man who had called Ethan boy, was apologizing in front of everyone. It was a scene people would not believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. Mr. Marshall, I was wrong, he said, voice shaky. I did not realize who you were. Ethan turned his head instantly. Just that motion alone was enough to shut Brian's mouth. Ethan spoke in a voice that was not loud, but so heavy it felt like iron. You were not wrong because of who I am. You were wrong because what you did was wrong. Whether I am a CEO or just a regular person walking up to your counter. Brian froze as if his entire body had turned to stone. In the silence that now wrapped the waiting area, Ethan continued, apologizing is the first step. But you need to understand that what you did today left scars for many people. Not just me. Brian bowed again. This time much lower. I understand. Ethan nodded slightly and looked away. The conversation was over. No shouting, no humiliation. Justice, when it stands firm, does not need to scream. A group of Spanish travelers walked by, whispering, "Ese hombre es poderoso," that man is powerful. A young mother holding her child looked at Ethan with gratitude. An elderly man nodded, as if witnessing the revival of righteousness itself. But among all those eyes, one stood out cautious, alert, yet filled with intense curiosity. A young white man, around 23, wearing an airport IT uniform, watching Ethan from the moment Protocol 27 triggered. His name was Miles Grant, the only son of Melissa Grant, and Ethan did not yet know that Miles would become an important link in everything that was about to unfold. Meanwhile, at Northern Sky's headquarters in Chicago, President Richard Hale was spiraling. His phone rang non-stop. Messages from the board of directors poured in. Reporters were calling relentlessly as the nationwide system remained grounded. But Hale kept repeating only one sentence. Call Sentinel Cyber Systems immediately. I want a full operational status report. Now. Right now. A trembling assistant answered, Sir Sentinel says, they are waiting for direct instructions from CEO Ethan. Marshall Hale set his pen down, exhausted but resolute. Then we wait. There is no other option. And in that moment, Northern Skies Airlines finally understood something they should have realized long ago. Ethan was not just a passenger. He was the man with the keys. Back at the airport, Ethan opened his laptop, took a sip of water, and began typing an email to the Sentinel team. Team, prepare to restore the system in phases. I will provide exact instructions after my meeting with Hale. Maintain maximum security. No one, including Northern Skies internal personnel, is allowed kernel access without my approval. A young employee nearby caught a glimpse of the words kernel authorization and nearly choked. She whispered to her friend, "He really controls everything." Her friend replied, eyes still fixed on Ethan. "Not control. That is called structural power." They both looked at Ethan like he was a monument. Then a soft voice came from the left. "Mr. Marshall." A black woman around 50, wearing a Northern Skies flight attendant uniform, stepped forward. Her name badge read Gloria Simmons. Her posture showed decades of experience, but her eyes carried something heavier, a pain endured far too long. She looked at Ethan, her voice trembling but strong. "I just want to thank you for what you did this morning." Ethan tilted his head. "You do not need to thank me." But Gloria shook her head. her eyes shimmering. For 27 years as a flight attendant, I have seen things nobody wants to believe. Passengers being called names, colleagues like me being disrespected openly. But no one does anything because we need our jobs, because we are afraid of losing our income. She met Ethan's eyes, emotion overflowing. But you have the power to change things. You did what we cannot. Ethan did not answer immediately. He simply listened, absorbing every vibration in her voice. Gloria continued. You did not stand up only for yourself. You stood up for all of us. No one in the airport spoke, but every gaze in that area softened. Not because they fully understood Ethan's experience, but because in this moment they sensed one truth clearly. Some people do not seek power, but when they must use it, they use it to change things, not to retaliate. Ethan nodded gently. Thank you. I understand. Gloria squeezed his hand for a second, then walked away. A chime echoed through the terminal. Bing bong. Attention Northern Skies. Airlines will release a system-wide statement shortly. The airport seemed to hold its breath. Ethan looked up at the electronic boards. More than 300 flights, thousands of people, one airline, one system, all waiting for his next move. Ethan inhaled slowly, deeply. Today he was not facing an airline. Today he was facing an entire culture, an entire decayed system millions of people had been forced to endure. And for the first time, that system was trembling before a man it once believed it could dismiss. Denver Airport felt like the heaving chest of a giant gasping for breath. Every flickering information board, every alert tone, every murmur from the crowd pressed together into an uneven, hurried, heavy pulse that vibrated through the terminal. And at the center of it all sat Ethan. People looked at him as if they were staring at a paradox, a man impossibly calm, while a massive aviation empire spiraled into free fall around him. No one knew how many thoughts were racing through his head, how many calculations, how much exhaustion woven tightly with determination. But one person looked at him differently. Not with curiosity, not with doubt, but with respect. She was a white woman of around 35, brown hair, tied neatly, light blue eyes like a lake after rainfall. She stepped toward him, stopping a few steps away, hands gently tightening the straps of her bag. "Excuse me, Mr. Marshall," she said softly, but without trembling. Ethan looked up. "Yes. I am Rachel Linden, Ground Operations Coordinator for Northern Skies. I witnessed everything." She swallowed hard, speaking slowly. "And I want to apologize for what you went through." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, not sharply, just deeply. "You do not need to apologize for an entire system," he said quietly. "You did not create it." But Rachel shook her head. "No, I stood there. I saw it. I heard it. And I stayed silent." Her voice cracked a little. "I'm not proud of that. I should have done something." Ethan said nothing. Most apologies are spoken to lighten one's own guilt. True apologies tremble the way hers did. She continued, "What Mr. Holden and the others did, it is not unusual in this industry. It happens often, but very few people have the power to make them answer for it." She tightened her grip slightly. "But you did." Ethan exhaled softly, a breath that carried both exhaustion and the resolve that kept him standing. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. Rachel gave a faint smile, then walked away. Ethan did not know that would not be the last time their paths crossed. Heavy footsteps approached behind him. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the illusion of control. Brian Holden was walking toward him, and for the first time all morning, he did not look like a gatekeeper guarding authority. He looked like a man walking toward a verdict. Every eye in the terminal followed him like metal to a magnet. Someone still recording zoomed the camera in closer. Brian stopped in front of Ethan. "Mr. Marshall," he started, but his voice cracked as if caught in his throat. I want to say Ethan didn't answer his gaze, still fixed on the tarmac. Brian inhaled sharply. "I am sorry. I am truly sorry." The entire area fell silent. Brian Holden, the man who had called Ethan boy, was apologizing before a crowd, a sight no one would believe unless they saw it themselves. "Mr. Marshall, I was wrong," he stammered. "I did not realize who you were." Ethan turned his head instantly. That single motion shut Brian up completely. Ethan spoke with a voice that was not loud, but weighed like stone. "You were not wrong because of who I am. You were wrong because what you did was wrong. Whether I am a CEO or just an ordinary person walking up to your counter." Brian froze. Ethan continued into the silence, pressing around them. "Apology is the first step. But what you did today leaves scars on many people. Not just me." Brian bowed again. "Lower this time. I understand." Ethan nodded slightly and turned away. The conversation was done. No shouting, no humiliation. Justice, when it stands upright, does not need to raise its voice. A group of Spanish travelers walked past, whispering, "Ese hombre es poderoso." That man is powerful. A young mother holding her child looked at Ethan with gratitude. An elderly man nodded, as if witnessing a revival of fairness itself. But among all those eyes was one that stood out most cautious alert and filled with deep curiosity. A young white man, around 23, wearing an airport IT uniform, had been watching Ethan since Protocol 27 was triggered. His name was Miles Grant, the only son of Melissa Grant. And Ethan didn't yet know that Miles would become a critical link in what was coming next. Meanwhile, at Northern Sky's headquarters in Chicago, President Richard Hale was unraveling. Phones rang relentlessly. Messages from the board poured in. Reporters called non-stop as a nationwide grounding brought the airline to its knees. But Hale kept repeating only one command. "Call Sentinel Cyber Systems immediately. I want a complete operational report. Now. Right now." A trembling assistant replied, "Sir Sentinel says they are waiting for direct instructions from CEO Ethan." Marshal Hale set down his pen, exhausted yet resolute. "Then we wait. There is no alternative." And in that moment, Northern Skies finally understood something they should have realized long ago. Ethan was not just a passenger. He was the one holding the keys. Back at Denver, Ethan opened his laptop, took a sip of water, and typed an email to his team. "Team, prepare phased system restoration. I will provide instructions after my meeting with Hale. Maintain maximum security. No one, including Northern Sky's internal personnel, is allowed kernel access without my approval." A young employee nearby caught sight of the phrase "kernel authorization" and nearly gasped. She whispered to her friend, He really is the one controlling everything," her friend said quietly, still staring at Ethan. "Not controlling. That is structural power." They looked at him as though he were a monument. Then a soft voice spoke from the left. "Mr. Marshall." A black woman around 50, wearing a Northern Skies flight attendant uniform, approached. Her badge read, "Gloria Simmons." Her posture showed decades of experience, but her eyes held something deeper, the weight of years of silent suffering. She looked at Ethan, voice trembling but firm. "I just want to thank you for what you did this morning." Ethan tilted his head. "You do not need to thank me." But Gloria shook her head, eyes filled with tears. "In 27 years as a flight attendant, I have seen things nobody would believe. Passengers insulted openly, colleagues treated like we are beneath everyone. But we do nothing, because we need our jobs, because we fear losing our paychecks." Her voice grew thick with emotion. "But you had the power to change things. You did what we cannot." Ethan listened quietly. Gloria added, "You didn't stand up only for yourself. You stood up for all of us." No one in the airport spoke, but many eyes softened. Not because they understood everything Ethan endured, but because in that moment they saw a truth. Some people do not seek power, but when they must use it, they use it to change things, not to punish. Ethan nodded gently. "Thank you. I understand." Gloria squeezed his hand briefly, then walked away. A chime rang through the airport. "Bing bong. Attention Northern Skies. Airlines will release a system-wide statement shortly." The whole terminal seemed to hold its breath. Ethan looked up at the giant departure boards. More than 300 flights, thousands of travelers, one airline, one system, all waiting for his next move. Ethan inhaled deeply. Today he was not confronting an airline. Today he was confronting an entire culture, an entire decaying system millions had been forced to endure. And for the first time, that system trembled before a man it once believed it could dismiss. The engines of the Boeing 787 roared in the distance, like a massive metal beast waking from a long sleep. The airport's electronic boards began shifting to green, each new line of on-time and boarding lighting up one after another like small sparks of hope after a storm. Denver International Airport was no longer a place consumed by chaos. It was breathing again, slowly, deeply, like a person who had finally found air after nearly suffocating. And every pair of eyes that had just lived through the upheaval turned toward a single man. Ethan Marshall. He sat there, his posture relaxed, but his eyes still sharp like a freshly honed blade. All the noise around him faded into a soft hum. People watched him the way they watched the main character of a story they never expected to witness in real life. But to Ethan, this was not a victory. It was only one small step in a far larger fight. A notification lit up on his phone. "Olivia Brooks, Ethan Hawthorne Capital just called. They are heading to Phoenix Airport with a private car to pick you up. They said, 'We have never seen a CEO handle a crisis like this.'" Ethan exhaled, a breath that seemed light on the surface but carried years of exhaustion underneath. He typed back, "Tell them I will arrive on time." Another message appeared. "Ava Carter, Colonel. Stability at 98%. Northern Skies system returning to normal. No security risks. Safe to proceed." Ethan typed, "Good. Keep full logs. We will need everything for the next phase." Ava replied with a thumbs-up icon, but Ethan knew she was operating at maximum alert. Protocol 27 was never meant to be used casually. It was created for large-scale cyber attacks. To use it for an ethical emergency, for moral accountability, was unprecedented. But Ethan understood something deeply. Sometimes to change a rotten system, you need one decisive strike. A strike strong enough to force those in power to confront themselves. As Ethan scanned through his emails, a figure approached him. A young man in an airport technician uniform, messy brown hair, intense dark blue eyes, filled with conflict. Miles Grant. The son of Melissa Grant, The supervisor fired that morning. Miles stood there for several seconds, as if he had to swallow his hesitation and his pain before speaking. Mr. Marshal Ethan looked up. Miles took a deep breath. "You do not know me, but my mother is Melissa Grant." The air around them chilled for a moment. Ethan did not react harshly, but his eyes sharpened just slightly. Miles continued, "I know what she did was wrong. I watched the videos. I am not here to defend her." He stared down at the polished stone floor, his fingers gripping the edge of his uniform. "But you were right. My mother grew up in a system where discrimination was normal. I am not saying that to excuse her, only that I want to apologize because she did not have the courage to do what was right." Ethan studied him longer this time. Miles was nothing like Melissa, nothing like Brian, nothing like Scott. He did not justify. He did not deflect. He did not run. He faced the truth. Ethan asked quietly, "What is your name, Miles?" "Miles," Ethan said slowly. "You do not owe me an apology. But what you just did proves you understand something many adults still refuse to admit." Miles looked up, eyes red, as if he had held back too many emotions. "I just do not want to be the next generation of people who stay silent when someone is treated unfairly." A simple sentence, but sharp enough to cut into the hearts of those within earshot. Ethan nodded. "Then start with yourself, not with your mother's mistakes, not with anyone else's, with you." Miles nodded firmly, determination flashing in his eyes. He walked away, unaware that this conversation would eventually change the course of his life and make him a key figure in the reform movement that would follow. Suddenly, the airport speakers chimed. Bing bong. "Attention, please. Northern Skies Airlines. President Richard Hale will deliver a nationwide statement in 3 minutes." The entire terminal stopped. A woman carrying her baby froze mid-step. A businessman who had been yelling into his phone went silent. Airport employees paused what they were doing. Thousands of passengers turned toward the screens mounted on every column. Ethan rose to his feet. People parted for him instinctively, like water being split by the bow of a ship. Dozens of screens lit up at once. Richard Hale appeared, his face pale from a sleepless night, his suit wrinkled, his tie loosened. Gone was the polished CEO from television interviews. Before them stood a man who understood that the shadow of his power had just been stripped away by one simple truth. Hale inhaled deeply and began. Today, Northern Skies Airlines failed. The terminal fell silent. Our system was shut down, but the cause was not a technical error. The cause was what happened here in Denver this morning. A nearby passenger whispered, "They are admitting it." "No excuses," Hale continued. "We discriminated against a passenger, without cause, without justification. There is no excuse. There is no acceptable explanation." His voice dropped, trembling slightly. "That passenger is Ethan Marshall, CEO of Sentinel Cyber Systems. But the shameful truth is this: even if he were not a CEO, what happened was still wrong." A single clap echoed from the far end of the terminal. Then another. Then the entire concourse erupted in applause. Ethan did not move. He simply stood straighter, his eyes dropping briefly toward the floor. Hale spoke again. "We have terminated the employees involved. We offer a public apology to Mr. Marshall and all passengers affected." A short breath. "Right, and we will change. Not because we were forced, but because we must." Hale looked into the camera with the expression of a man seeing his own failures clearly for the first time. Today's blow was painful, but necessary. Hundreds of passengers turned toward Ethan, the man standing quietly among them, his shadow stretching long across the polished stone. When the live stream ended, a group of people walked toward Ethan. Not for photos, not for signatures, but to say thank you. One person said, "You did not just fix a small issue. You fixed something much larger." A woman clutching her bag said through reddened eyes, "You said the words we were always afraid to say." Ethan responded to all of them with a small nod. He had not done it to be praised. He had done it because he had endured enough. He had done it so that no one after him would have to endure the same. The speakers chimed again. Northern Skies, Flight 2187 to Phoenix is now boarding. First-class passengers may proceed to Gate Bravo 19. The crowd turned toward him. They knew it was his flight. Ethan closed his laptop and stood. He walked, not fast, not slow, but with the weight of a man who had confronted a system and won through calm conviction alone. At Gate Bravo 19, a flight attendant in a pristine uniform stepped forward from behind the podium. She looked at Ethan and smiled a bright, genuine expression, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Mr. Marshall, it is an honor to have you with us today." Ethan nodded. She bowed her head slightly, not out of fear, not out of politics, not because he had put anyone in their place, but because she understood this man had made an entire industry look in the mirror. Ethan handed over his boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, sir." He stepped onto the jet bridge. The warm cabin lights of the 787 washed over him, strong and golden, like the beginning of something new. And as the door closed behind him, soft but echoing like a distant bell, it carried a message that would ripple far beyond Denver. A new chapter had begun. The Northern Skies. Boeing 787 turned onto the runway, the golden lights along its body stretching into what looked like an endless ribbon of fire. From the first-class cabin, Ethan Marshall looked out the window and watched thin traces of melting frost disappear under the engine's heat. The gentle hum of the cabin ventilation blended with the soft rustling of newspapers, forming a strange, serene soundtrack that contrasted sharply with the storm he had unleashed only hours earlier. Inside first class, no one dared act overly relaxed. No one spoke loudly. No one tried to sneak a recording of him anymore. Not out of fear, out of respect. Ethan could feel the stares around him, not the curious kind, but the kind that comes from people who know they are sitting near a living witness of change. The lead flight attendant, Grace Donovan, approached. She was about 35, poised with honest brown eyes, shaped by years of working in an industry where the shadow of discrimination had always lingered beneath the polished surface. "Mr. Marshall," Grace said gently, "if you need anything, absolutely anything, just let me know." Ethan offered a small smile. "Thank you, Grace. I'm fine." She nodded, but did not walk away immediately. Her gaze lingered, her voice dropping into a tone that carried a truth Ethan had heard his entire life. "What you did today means far more than you think. Employees like us, we have waited 10 years or more for a moment like this." Ethan looked up. "You did not just fix a first-class ticket," Grace said. "You fixed the measuring stick this industry uses to judge people." Ethan dipped his head in appreciation. Grace walked away, but her words stayed with him, like a shard of sunlight, piercing into a dark, familiar corner. About 5 minutes after the plane reached cruising altitude, Ethan opened his laptop to review materials for the upcoming meeting with Hawthorne Capital. Everything remained flawless, unchanged. Except one thing: the way people looked at him, and the way he looked at himself. Ethan had never fought to be admired. He fought to survive, to stay whole. There was no dramatic moment that suddenly made him strong. There was only a childhood of scarcity in Detroit. Only the bitter eyes of people who told him he was not good enough. Only the rejections no one dared explain honestly. Only his father, a quiet, strict, dignified man who told him one thing: you do not need to beat them. You just need to never let them step on your pride. For 20 years, Ethan had lived by that single compass. A soft ding sounded. A new message from Olivia Brooks. Urgent update: the American press is exploding. NBC, ABC, CNBC, Fox News, Bloomberg. Everyone is reporting on Protocol 27, on you and on northern skies. Are you ready for the media storm? Ethan smirked. No, I am only ready for the meeting with Hawthorne, Olivia replied instantly. Classic CEO, a small smiling icon. Olivia rarely sent icons, which said everything about how proud she was. Ethan closed his laptop, leaned back, and for a rare moment allowed himself to close his eyes. A gentle hand touched his armrest. Ethan opened his eyes. A 60-year-old man stood there. Black, salt and pepper hair, the worn posture of someone who had worked with his hands his whole life. Sorry to bother you, he said, voice tired and deep. But I wanted to say something. Ethan nodded. I am Walter Pierce. Been working for this airline 22 years. I just want to say Walter's voice thinned, rough as gravel. Thank you for standing up. I have seen so many passengers treated unfairly, seen my colleagues insulted with no courage to speak. Walter gripped the headrest, his hand trembling. Today I saw something I thought I would never witness in my entire life. A man who did not look the other way. A man who did not fear. Ethan rested a hand on the armrest, voice sincere. I am not a hero. I just did what anyone deserves. Walter shook his head. No, you do not understand. When a black man stands up in a place where everyone expects him to stay silent, his eyes were deep, ocean-like. You change the entire generation that comes after. The word struck the place inside Ethan, where he had buried so much, the place containing every time he had been called the word Holden, dared to say. That morning, the place holding the anger he had always restrained, the place containing the patience he had been forced to learn. Walter placed a rough hand on his shoulder. You opened a door many of us never dared touch. Then he walked away. Ethan did not respond. But his hand closed into a fist, not in anger, but because he finally felt the true weight of this day. Not because of a first-class seat, not because he was a CEO, but because of the thousands like Walter, the ones who endured silently, the ones who had nowhere to lean. Today they had seen that sometimes it only takes one person, one single person standing at the right moment to make the entire system tremble. As the airplane began its descent into Phoenix, the sunlight spilled golden across the desert sky. Red mountain ridges emerged beneath thin layers of cloud. The beauty of it made Ethan forget everything for a few seconds. The aircraft glided down onto the runway, the tires touching with a soft thump. At that exact moment, Ethan's phone lit up with a message from Olivia. Ethan, there is something you should know before you get off the plane. He frowned. A second message followed instantly. Hawthorne Capital is not just impressed. They held an emergency meeting with their investment board. They want to increase the investment package to $600 million. And they want to meet you the moment you walk out of the gate. Ethan leaned back slowly. Not because of the money, but because he understood something very clearly. Real power does not come from money. Money is simply a side effect of integrity. The plane came to a full stop. Some passengers stood, but none pushed to go ahead. They looked toward Ethan as if waiting for him to move first, but he remained seated, not out of pride, but because he no longer had to prove anything. When the line finally began to move, Grace waited by the door. "Mr. Marshall," she said, like a farewell blessing, "I hope we have the honor of flying with you again in the future." Ethan smiled. "I also hope we will never have another day like today again." Grace laughed softly, warmly. When Ethan stepped off the aircraft's stairway, a young man in a gray suit was standing there waiting. He bowed slightly. "Welcome to Phoenix, Mr. Marshall. I am Daniel Carter, representing Hawthorne Capital." Daniel opened the door of a sleek black SUV waiting just outside. "Hawthorne is very eager to meet you." And if I may speak frankly, he looked at Ethan with admiration and disbelief intertwined. No CEO in the history of aviation has ever done what you did this morning. Ethan stepped into the vehicle but spoke through the rearview mirror, his voice calm. "I did not do it to make noise. I did it because if I stayed silent today, someone like me would be treated worse tomorrow." Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "And that is exactly why you are different." The SUV rolled away from Phoenix Airport. In the sky behind them, the Northern Skies logo gleamed brightly. No longer just the emblem of an airline, but the symbol of a transformation already underway, unstoppable. And at its center, alone steady as a silhouette before a storm, was Ethan Marshall, the man who proved that real power does not come from shouting. It comes from the moment you refuse to bow. The black SUV glided down the main boulevard leading into Phoenix's financial district, like a steel arrow cutting through the late afternoon light. Towering glass buildings caught the sun and cast long shadows over the immaculate streets. Inside the vehicle, Ethan Marshall sat with his arms crossed quietly, observing the passing reflections on the window deep in thought. Daniel Carter, the representative from Hawthorne Capital, glanced at him through the rearview mirror from time to time, but did not dare interrupt. Even though they had only met minutes earlier, Daniel already understood one thing with absolute clarity. When Ethan was silent, it meant he was calculating something enormous. Yet Daniel had no idea that Ethan was not thinking about investment figures, not thinking about the upcoming meeting, and not even thinking about the media storm waiting for him outside. He was thinking about his father, about that old saying, about those summer evenings when they sat behind the small house in Detroit, his father rubbing oil into a pair of worn-out work boots. "Son, you just need to live in a way that forces people to respect you, even if deep down they don't want to." Ethan never imagined that those words would one day become the foundation that forced an entire airline to bow before the truth. The SUV stopped in front of Hawthorne Capital's 45-story glass tower. Daniel opened the door and guided Ethan across the vast lobby where dozens of shareholders, employees, and partners bustled past. No one recognized Ethan at first, but that changed instantly when Daniel raised his voice. "Attention, please. CEO Ethan Marshall of Sentinel Cyber Systems has arrived." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. A woman dropped her stack of documents. A group of employees froze mid-conversation. A middle-aged man sipping coffee choked. Ethan walked through the parted crowd with the calm presence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Before he got far, an elevator opened on the upper level. A man in his early 50s strode out with quick steps and a severe expression, though his eyes shone as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. This was Charles Hawthorne, chairman of the firm. Ethan Marshall. Charles said, his voice deep and resonant. I watched everything that happened this morning. You did not just handle a crisis. You handled an entire system. He extended his hand. Ethan shook it. The handshake was firm, strong, like two forged steel bars clashing. We have an entire boardroom waiting, Charles said. But before we go in, I have one question. He looked into Ethan's eyes. If this morning you had not been a CEO, had no shares, and had no protocol, 27, would you still have stood up? The air went still. Ethan answered slowly. I have been standing up for 30 years, Charles. The only difference is today the world finally saw it. Charles let out a rare laugh, the kind only a man used to carrying nations of money and influence could release. A perfect answer. He gestured ahead. Come, we have much to discuss. The conference room on the 38th floor glowed under bright white lights. More than 20 senior investors sat around the table, and all of them rose when Charles and Ethan entered. The moment Ethan took his seat, the massive screen lit up. A headline appeared. Breaking news. Black CEO forces airline to its knees. Northern Skies issues nationwide statement. Several investors exchanged looks filled with shock and admiration. Charles folded his arms. Ethan, today's meeting is not only about the $600 million investment. We want to hear you talk about this. He pointed at the news broadcast. Because what you did this morning is not a scandal to us. It is evidence of leadership at the highest systemic level. An older, silver-haired investor leaned forward. You forced an entire system to change with a single phone call. You forced a CEO to issue a national apology. You altered operational procedures for an entire airline. You accomplished what most people only dare discuss at conferences. He removed his glasses, eyes as sharp as a blade. We want to know, what do you intend to do with that kind of power? The room fell completely silent. The lights cast a hard edge along Ethan's jawline, giving him the appearance of carved stone. He did not answer immediately. He let the moment mature, like a note drawn slowly on a violin string. Then he spoke. You all know this. I did not build Sentinel to become a billionaire. I built it to prove that people who look like me can build things no one believed they could build. Ethan leaned back. But today I realized something. I can do more than build a company. I can build a precedent. He looked each investor in the eye. If a black CEO can force an entire industry to look at itself, then those who come after me will not have to start from zero like I did. The silence in the room grew so still, one could hear the hum of the air vents. A young female investor whispered, He is not talking about tech. He is talking about the future of an entire generation. Charles nodded firmly. Then here is our decision. He rose from his chair. Hawthorne Capital will invest $600 million into Sentinel Cyber Systems. Another investor stood. And $50 million for an education fund designated by Mr. Marshall. Another investor followed. I will contribute $10 million to a STEM program for black youth. Yet another spoke. I commit support to any structural reform initiatives Mr. Marshall chooses to develop. In less than 3 minutes, commitments approached $1 billion. No criticism, no hesitation, no jockeying for position. The atmosphere felt like the beginning of a movement none of them knew was about to become a national force. Ethan sat still. No smile, no triumph. He only said, I accept the investment. But I have one condition. The room rose in attention. Charles asked. What condition? Ethan answered. You will not only invest in Sentinel, you will invest in equity. His gaze swept the room like a blade. And I will demand transparency, accountability, and action, not when the media is watching, but on the days when no one is. The meeting ended in a long, thunderous round of applause. When Ethan stepped out of the building, Phoenix was lighting up. The amber glow of the city washed over his face, making him look like a warrior emerging from a quiet but fierce battle. His phone vibrated, a message from President Hale. "Ethan, I just announced the new Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer position. I want to invite you to serve as Special Advisor for 6 months. I hope you will accept." Ethan looked at the screen. He knew the battle this morning did not end at Gate D17. It did not end with the live stream apology. It did not end in the Phoenix boardroom. It was only beginning. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt he was no longer fighting alone. He typed, "I will join. Not for northern skies, for the people like me." He slipped his phone into his pocket, lifted his head, and breathed deeply. The Phoenix sky was turning amber purple, the color of a new chapter opening. Ethan Marshall walked forward, calm yet unbreakable like a straight line that no force could bend. Because deep inside him, a truth had been etched forever. When one person becomes strong enough to stand alone, millions will find the courage to stand with him. The Phoenix afternoon fell like molten steel. The setting sun poured streaks of red and orange across the towering glass buildings, making the entire city look like a massive flame, breathing in the desert heat. Ethan Marshall stepped out of the Hawthorne Capitol Tower, the dry, warm desert wind hitting his face with a force that felt harsh, yet alive. People often said Phoenix was the place where reinvention happened. For Ethan, that became true today. He had not only closed a $600 million deal, he had not only forced an airline to rebuild itself from the ground up, he had just proven to the world that respect is not something granted. It is something that even the powerful are forced to acknowledge when you stand tall and refuse to bow. Ethan took a deep breath, a breath that felt like closing one old chapter and stepping into a new one, filled with even greater challenges. Hawthorne's SUV waited nearby. Daniel Carter opened the door. "There are some people who want to meet you right away. And trust me, you will want to meet them." Ethan frowned but stepped into the car. "Who?" Daniel let out a mysterious laugh. "You will see shortly." The SUV moved through Phoenix's wide streets and headed toward Midtown, where non-profit organizations and civil rights groups had their headquarters. It stopped in front of a modest sandstone building with a simple sign, "The Equality Alliance Network." Ethan recognized the name. It was the largest organization fighting discrimination in transportation and public services. "They contacted us right after seeing the Denver footage," Daniel explained. "They said they want to discuss a proposal, something unprecedented." Inside the lobby, Ethan immediately recognized one of the 3 people waiting. It was Diane Porter, the former federal judge, whose landmark rulings against police discrimination once shook the country. Beside her stood Lamar Jenkins, president of the Black Aviation Coalition, a man who had spent 10 years fighting for equality in the aviation industry. And next to him was Jasmine Reynolds, the young pilot who had once sent Ethan a thank you letter from the cockpit of a Northern Skies plane. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A group like this in one room? Nearly impossible. Diane stepped forward and extended her hand. "Mr. Marshall, we are the people who have been following your battle most closely today." Ethan shook her hand firmly but politely. "Thank you. But I was not fighting alone. Jasmine stepped forward, smiling warmly. No, you were not. But you were the first person who made the entire industry stop and listen. Lamar nodded, his expression serious. We want to talk about what comes next. Something bigger than this morning. Bigger than northern skies. Ethan crossed his arms, his eyes sharpening. I am listening. They entered a small conference room. The door closed behind them, and the atmosphere shifted heavier, deeper, more serious. Diane opened her laptop and projected a massive chart onto the wall. Racial discrimination in United States transportation and public service 20-year report. The numbers were brutal. 67% of black passengers reported differential treatment while flying. 48% said they were subjected to extra security checks. 1/3 reported being denied upgrades or service for unclear reasons. The percentage of black airline employees in senior executive positions, 0.5%. Lamar braced his arms on the table. You see, what you experienced today is not an exception. It is the tip of the iceberg. Ethan nodded. He already knew. He had known his entire life. Jasmine clicked to the next slide. A photo of Ethan appeared standing in the Denver airport. Posture calm, shoulders squared, gaze steady. And beneath it, a single line. One moment can become a spark. Diane spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Mr. Marshall, we want you to become the strategic advisor for a full-scale reform initiative across the aviation industry. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The entire industry, yes, Lamar said. Not just Northern Skies. We want the FAA involved. We want every airline. We want airport security. Everyone. Jasmine added softly, hopeful but firm. You have a voice they cannot ignore. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, deep in thought. The idea struck him like lightning. If Northern Skies changed, that was one airline. But if the entire industry changed, that would not be Ethan's story anymore. It would be the story of millions of Americans. Diane placed her hand on the table. The Denver incident triggered a domino effect. Opportunities like this appear once every 20 years. Lamar continued. The aviation industry is terrified. They know that if they do not change, they will be the next Northern Skies. Jasmine looked straight at Ethan, her voice cracking with emotion. You did not just change my future today. You changed the future for kids dreaming of sitting behind the controls of a Boeing. The room fell into complete silence. All eyes turned to Ethan, and Ethan understood this was no longer about him. This was an invitation to a battle he had avoided for too long. Finally, he said, I agree, but I have a condition. All three looked at him. Ethan spoke clearly. I do not want a symbolic project. I want structural change. Structural what Lamar asked. Ethan answered the power chain. Diane's eyebrows tightened, but she nodded. I think we understand each other. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed timelines of 6 months, 1 year, and 3 years. They discussed training policy changes, incident reporting systems. They discussed annual transparency reports, requiring all airlines to publish discrimination data. They discussed potential federal legislation to follow. A reform movement, unlike anything seen before, was taking shape in that small Phoenix conference room. And Ethan Marshall, the man who had been called boy that same morning, now stood at the center of a national transformation. When the meeting ended, Jasmine walked Ethan to the door. Alone in the hallway, she whispered, I do not know how to thank you. Ethan smiled. You thank me by living the dream you are chasing. That is enough. Jasmine finally smiled, soft and genuine after a long, heavy day. Outside night had fully settled. Phoenix glowed warm and bright, a sea of lights shimmering across the desert floor. Ethan paused on the sidewalk, taking a long breath. The wind carried the scent of sand dust and change. His phone buzzed. A message from President Hale. The nationwide statement is spreading at record speed. If you are willing, I want to work with you to build a new standard for the aviation industry. You are not alone in this. Then came a message from Olivia. CNN wants you. NBC is calling. Hawthorne wants to schedule a press briefing. And you should check social media. It's exploding. Ethan opened Twitter. Thousands of posts, millions of views, and the hashtag Stand With Marshall at #1 across the country. He turned off the screen. Anger, humiliation, effort, hope, victory, all of it washed over him at once. He closed his eyes. Then he smiled, a small smile sharp as a blade, because he knew the fight did not end today, but today he had changed the direction of the wind. Ethan Marshall walked through the Phoenix lights, not fast, not proud, not weary, just a man stepping calmly into a new chapter, one of change, responsibility, and unshakable strength. And at that very moment, Ethan understood one truth with perfect clarity. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the day a revolution begins. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational behavior, power dynamics, and ripple effects within service environments, Ethan Marshall's journey reveals a fundamental truth that society often avoids. Confronting injustice does not erupt from grand moments. It grows quietly from small behaviors tolerated over long periods until they become part of the structure itself. But for that very reason, when even one person is calm enough, rational enough, and steadfast enough to stand up at the right moment, an entire system that once seemed immovable can be forced to look at itself. Ethan did not use power for revenge. He used it to pose a more important question. Does this system deserve the people it is meant to serve? When an individual dares to confront wrongdoing, instead of silently enduring it, they do more than correct the truth for themselves. They unintentionally become the catalyst for broader change, for another generation, for those without a voice, and for an entire industry that once believed it stood outside social accountability. If this story stirred something within you, give this video a like so the message of fairness can spread even further. And if you want to follow more journeys where a single decision can spark major reform, do not forget to hit subscribe and continue with us. Finally, leave a short phrase in the comments to preserve the spirit of this story. Stand tall as a reminder that sometimes when one person refuses to bow, the entire world is forced to change its perspective.